Hello YouTube, this is King Orange here, back again for another video. So, as I am currently producing my Galactic Empire analysis video, as well as awaiting certain editing that needs to be finished up for my next Versus content, I have decided in the meantime to take a revisit of my old Versus collaboration with Deadponic. Since many of you did not have prior exposure towards that video due to it being on Deadponic's channel instead of my own, even in spite of some of my best efforts, I've decided to go back and repost the Count Dooku analysis segment of the Versus video for my channel. This is mostly to give everyone just exposure towards my analytical breakdown of Count Dooku, and to see where I can do better in the future if and when I make another video involving Dooku. Of course, I am coming in with the understanding that this is not exactly an original set of content. However, I figured it was good to do, mainly because of the reception of the Luke Skywalker vs. Count Dooku Versus Collab, and also as displaying a personal thanks and bit of YouTube promotion to my good friend Deadponic, who has pretty much been a lifesaver in terms of aiding me within YouTube production. However, that being said, I can understand why some have been frustrated by my rather inconsistent posting of videos, with some taking as little as a few weeks while others take a month. Unfortunately, due to moving in back to my college and my fall semester about to begin, my hand has been forced in that regard. However, I'm going to try as best as I can to stay up to date with my content, as well as keeping everyone informed about what kind of content's going to be coming out in the future and what date to expect its release. With that all out of the way, I hope you enjoy my Versus analysis of Count Dooku based upon the Versus collaboration with Deadponic, and just so everyone knows, the link will be included in the description below. Born 102 years before the Battle of Yavin, Dooku, a young noble of Serenu, was inducted into the Jedi Order at a young age. Trained by Grand Master Yoda, Dooku quickly rose to prominence as one of the finest and most gifted swordsmen in the Order. However, during his time serving the Order, Dooku became disillusioned by the corruption of the Galactic Republic and inefficiencies of the Jedi Council. This combined with his departure shortly after the Naboo crisis due to finally breaking at the loss of his apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn. Not long after his departure, he was approached by the Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Sidious, promised with the chance to bring about a new galactic rule that would bring peace and order. Dooku pledged himself to the Sith and was dubbed Darth Tyrannus. After 10 years of carrying out orders for Sidious, including orchestrating the creation of the clones, Count Dooku would become the leader of the emerging Confederacy of Independent Systems, a fraudulent puppet state created for the Sith Grand Plan. After leading the Separatists for 3 years during the Clone Wars, Dooku would face off against Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker one last time during the Battle of Coruscant, and subsequently was defeated by the Chosen One. However, much to his horror, Palpatine had betrayed Dooku and ordered Anakin to execute him. Dooku's death gave Sidious the opening he needed to separate Skywalker from his master and quietly corrupt him, eventually taking him as the newly minted Darth Vader, and fulfilling the Sith imperative by utterly destroying the Jedi Order, while Dooku would be remembered as little more than a failed revolutionary. By the time of his death on board the Invisible Hand, Count Dooku was an 83-year-old human male who was in extremely good shape in spite of being a man of his years. Throughout his entire life, he had maintained a slender but imposing build, and utilized his Jedi training and Sith battle experience to preserve being a top-tier fighter in his golden years. Accounts have also presented that Dooku's age has rarely operated as a handicap, and even was stated to wear his 8 decades better than most humans would half his age. Dooku has also displayed very little dark side degradation, only suffering consistently from the slightly paler skin and rare occurrences of yellow eyes during heavier immersion of the dark side, though it is worth noting that the latter was only depicted in TCW. However, Dooku did admit that he suffered from degenerate effects in his advanced age, with the Count even admitting to suffering fatigue during his final confrontation with Kenobi and Skywalker on the Invisible Hand. As for physical augmentation, Dooku has displayed very impressive force enhancements. Strength-wise, Dooku was stated by many sources, including Sir Christopher Lee, to possess immense physical power, and it is shown through Dooku overriding Kenobi within a saberlock in their skirmish on Geonosis, stonewalled Asajj Ventress's Jar-Kai Frenzy on more than one occasion with just one hand, and has even withstood the onslaught of General Grievous during their many sparring sessions. Dooku was also able to integrate physical techniques with his duels against other opponents, such as when he used the spinning side stamp to fold Skywalker, as well as doing a wheel kick on Kenobi's chin that was so strong it caused a crack-like sound to occur and knocked Kenobi all the way down the stairs, with even a realistic hope that it could have broken his neck. However, it is noted in the novel that Dooku was physically the weakest out of the 3 fighters, with Dooku even stating that he could not meet Skywalker's power blows strength to strength, and having to drain massive amounts of force reserves just to prevent the Chosen One from cutting him in half. Dooku's speed was held at a similar level as his strength. Dooku has consistently displayed that he can more than keep up with even the best opponents of his era. Dooku was also showcased to be able to keep up with the speed of Yoda's Ataro Whirlwind for a limited amount of time, and was even able to score hits on Yoda during their second fight on Vajun, though it is worth noting Dooku was enhanced by a Darkside Nexus during the latter engagement. However, Dooku was notably shaken by the speed of Anakin and Obi-Wan, with the latter being regarded by Dooku for having a bewilderingly fast defense. In terms of stamina, Dooku's capabilities were highly dependent on circumstances. Against younger but far weaker Jedi, Dooku had no issue within a prolonged engagement due to the massive amount of force reserves he could draw on, which allowed him to effectively compensate for his advanced years. However, when going against opponents of equal or near equal power levels, his stamina had more noticeable gaps. Within both of his engagements with Yoda, Dooku was visibly taxed and exhausted, with his bout on Vajun even describing the Count as sweating after his fight with Yoda. Dooku has also admitted within the Revenge of the Sith novelization that his stamina was his weakest attribute, and had to consistently drain force reserves just to withstand Kenobi and Skywalker. Dooku has even admitted that simply blocking Anakin's strikes required him to draw on more power than what he needed to throw Kenobi across the room. In terms of durability, Dooku's feats were limited due to having a combat advantage in most of his fights. However, he was able to withstand multiple physical blows such as punches, kicks, and attempted strangulations from Anakin, who was stated in the Revenge of the Sith novel to have ended up becoming the physically strongest Jedi of his era. In terms of attire, Dooku had worn many outfits during his life, though this matchup shall be accounting for his main attire he has worn through the Clone Wars and during the time of his death. Dooku had worn a traditional Serenian close-fitted tunic, with trousers that were typically colored in various black and brown shades depending on the art style, high leather and rank boots, and a utility belt similar to those that were worn by Jedi. Dooku also had sported a near-floor brown cape to announce his authority, with the only combat feature of the cape being that it was made out of a flexible armor-weaving line that enabled him to dissipate blaster bolts and even provided a minuscule amount of protection against lightsabers. In conclusion, Count Dooku was a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. He wasn't stronger, faster, or as enduring as the absolute best physical Jedi and Sith, but he did possess the ability to contend with them, and anyone below top-tier level would be met with an extremely hard time by the Count. However, the Count has suffered with tight battles due to his advanced age, and in spite of how fit and versatile he is still past his prime. During his young years within the Jedi Order, Dooku was the most gifted student of his generation and was a natural prodigy with a lightsaber. Taking full advantage of his gifts, Dooku developed to become one of the greatest lightsaber duelists in the history of the Jedi Order, and served as a remarkable lightsaber instructor. However, after his departure from the Jedi Order and subsequent fall to the dark side, Dooku's combat gifts would be turned against the Jedi Order, and would be responsible for the deaths of many Jedi within his era. Dooku's chosen fighting style was Form 2 Makashi, which was the second classical form of Jedi lightsaber combat. Makashi was an ancient fencing style that was specifically designed for lightsaber dueling. For a time, Form 2 was the most common combat discipline a Jedi could learn. However, it gradually got phased out due to the emergence of blaster-based weapons becoming more and more common, rendering Makashi obsolete in the eyes of most Jedi. This only caused Dooku's choice to specialize in Makashi to be considered both unconventional and extremely rare. Dooku had also refined skill in the other 6 forms of lightsaber combat, and could serve as an instructor for any of them, and built his skill sets to be able to counter all of them if need be. While Dooku did have the capabilities of using other forms, he viewed the use of hybridized styles and techniques with disdain, considering it to compromise a duelist's overall skill by spreading themselves too thin on many disciplines. While it could be said that his knowledge of the other forms did influence his personal style, even if unconsciously, Dooku never actively employed any other style other than pure Makashi within live combat. Accordingly, Dooku used his own personalized technique to take the capabilities and core elements of Makashi to the absolute maximum level. Dooku utilized a linear cut and thrust style that prioritized precision, fluidity, control, and energy conservation. One of Makashi's greatest strengths was how conservative it was, with little physical exertion being required to employ the discipline effectively. This made the style perfectly suited for Dooku, and allowed him to further compensate for his advanced age. Dooku was noted to be so relaxed when fighting that observers even described him as if he was dancing during his engagements. One element of Makashi's discipline that Dooku strongly adhered to was the development of unique movesets in order to avoid predictability. Dooku had been able to take Makashi to such a high degree that he was even able to transcend many of its greatest weaknesses as a style. He was highly effective on the battlefield and was able to take on multiple opponents with little difficulty, and was even able to overcome one of Makashi's most consistent shortcomings through performing blast deflection. However, Dooku did have notable shortcomings in trying to meet opponents head-to-head, and had instead opted to take the path of least resistance, using lateral movements to keep himself out of his opponent's line of attack while also keeping them in his. Dooku built his offensive to work to bypass and undermine the defenses of his opponents, rather than overwhelm it outright. Meanwhile, Dooku built his defense to deflect and evade enemy strikes rather than attempting to stonewall them. Something worth noting about Count Dooku is that he rarely assumed an offensive or defensive posture, and instead rotated consistently between an advance and retreat moveset. This technique allowed him to avoid head-on engagements by not allowing his opponents to form an offensive or defensive foothold. Dooku had also been refined in integrating force and physical attacks within his lightsaber sequences, using telekinesis to bypass the enemy's defenses and leave more lines open for attack. This added to Dooku's strategy of creating diversionary attacks and opposing psychological warfare to undermine his opponent's defenses. As a built complement to Dooku's approach to lightsaber combat, Dooku built himself a curved tilt lightsaber that was equipped with a dual phase function that enabled him to shorten the blade into a shoto. As a Jedi, Dooku had a blue Ilum crystal as the focusing lens. However, after becoming Darth Tyrannus, Dooku would exchange his blue crystal for a red synthetic crystal, which provided him greater cutting power at the expense of maneuverability. Overall, Dooku's approach to lightsaber combat was a direct reflection of both his greatest strengths, but also his most crippling weaknesses. When Dooku is able to hold the initiative, keep his opponents off balance, and prevent his opponents from bringing their full power to bear, he is extremely precise and lethal. However, the main reason Dooku built his technique the way he did in avoiding head-on engagements was because of his inability to handle head-to-head engagements, especially given his old age. As his final duel with Anakin Skywalker showcased, when Dooku is cornered with no control or escape, he crumbles under the pressure. In conclusion, while Dooku does suffer some serious weaknesses, they should not be viewed as a detraction from his skills or effectiveness. Count Dooku is one of the greatest duelists in galactic history, the ultimate prodigy and refiner of Makashi, engaged some of the greatest warriors within the Jedi Order, and has only barely fallen short as the greatest swordmaster of his era. In the end, Count Dooku did not contain the power of a Rancor nor the speed of a Kaidu, but possessed the precision of a serpent who through every aspect of his style, technique, and discipline would make his enemies suffer the death of 1,000 cuts.
If you are to succeed in combat against the best of the Jedi, you must have fear, surprise, and intimidation on your side. For if any one element is lacking, it would be best for you to retreat. You must break them before you engage them. Only then will you ensure victory and have your trophy.
Much like his gifts with the blade, Dooku was a prodigy within the Force, and much like within lightsaber dueling, he took full advantage of this attribute. Dooku developed to become one of the most powerful Force wielders in the history of the Jedi Order. However, Dooku's fascination with Sith lore, combined with his continued growth of resentment against the Republic, drove him to the dark side. Upon becoming a Sith Lord, Count Dooku believed that he could control and utilize the dark side without succumbing to its corruptive influence, by remaining faithful to his principles as well as maintaining emotional discipline. However, in spite of this effort, the corrosive influence of Darth Sidious caused Dooku's ideals to be distorted, and his mind to be far more ruthless and borderline psychopathic. While this did turn Dooku into a self-serving tyrant, it also strengthened his growth and development as a Sith Lord, enabling him to leverage the power of the dark side in a magnitude he otherwise would not have been able to achieve. During his time as a Jedi, Dooku was already a master of telekinesis, and instructed classes on how to best utilize it. However, as a Sith, Dooku had been able to turn his skill with telekinesis into a horrifying instrument of power. Basic pushes and shoves allowed Dooku to thrash and manhandle opposing targets, and had even pulled a Jedi directly into his lightsaber blade during a duel. Dooku also displayed an advanced application of Force Grip, which he used to choke enemies out, make use of loose objects as environmental weapons, and even accomplish personal levitation. Much like his lightsaber technique, Dooku focused the range of his powers on precision and control over blunt force, though Dooku has showcased that he can overwhelm opponents with sheer magnitude when the situation called for it. Dooku has also been able to unleash force waves that are capable of scattering large groups of enemies, and shoving objects as large as starships with only minor difficulty. Dooku had also possessed strong defenses against other force wielders of similar magnitude. being capable of either evading the telekinetic assault or tanking the hit outright with his impressive force barrier. Offensively, Dooku has been able to reliably penetrate the force defenses of opposing force wielders, and has been able to win through ragdolling his opponent on more than one occasion. His growth as a Sith Lord had also allowed Dooku to gain the power of Force Lightning. While not as powerful as his master's use of it, Dooku could generate lightning against both single and multiple opponents that could kill or incapacitate on impact, though more often than not, Dooku had favored the use of lightning as an instrument of torture. To complement this, Dooku had displayed that he was capable of using Tutamenis, a power that enabled force wielders to absorb and redirect energy. Dooku had been showcased of being capable of using the ability to at least his own magnitude of force lightning, and presumably had been able to deflect blaster bolts with it. On top of the many combative abilities at Dooku's disposal, Dooku had also held possession of many utility-based force powers. For starters, Dooku is familiar with the use of Sith sorcery and has participated in many Sith rituals with Darth Sidious. Dooku was also an advanced telepath, and held the ability to influence the minds of weak-willed subjects, and control the minds of beasts and animals, such as when he tamed a krayt dragon, and effectively made use of it like a pet. Dooku also had a moderate refinement within Force concealment, allowing him to hide his Force signature from other adepts, though in Dooku's case, he could still be discovered by those who were actively looking for him. As a final note, Dooku has been able to use the Force to cleanse his body of poisons and diseases, such as when he cleansed himself of the Keratos Plague after Jango Fett exposed him to it to gain leverage over him. Although Dooku had failed to properly cleanse the Night Sister poison that dulled his senses, it is worth noting this strike both happened while Dooku was sleeping, and that Dooku did not have time to gather his energies for the cleansing, as he was attacked almost immediately afterwards. As far as physical augmentation was concerned, he mostly used it as compensation for his age. Overall, Count Dooku's applications with the Force were geared towards utility, precision, and control over blunt power, operating more as a man with a large toolbox rather than relying solely on the biggest hammer. While this made Dooku's application of the Force a lot more settled, it also made him far more dangerous, as most opponents would not know what abilities Dooku could muster against them until it was far too late. And because his technique with the Force was very similar to his technique with a lightsaber, it enabled him to use the Force to be extremely complementary to his skills with the blade. While he does have limits on how far he can push his Force energies before giving out, it is worth noting that the only two beings that pushed Dooku to completely run out of reserves were Grandmaster Yoda and Anakin Skywalker, the two most powerful Jedi within the Order by the time of his death. To conclude, Dooku's use of the Force was similar to a surgeon. In most cases, he would not overwhelm you outright, but he would ensure that you remain off balance and fearful of the next ability he could muster. He was not a boulder seeking to crush you, he was a river seeking to drown you.